My husband threw the invoice on the counter. A resort, 2 nights, $4,200. The exact place I had begged him to visit with me 3 years ago. "Who did you go with?" I asked. He crossed his arms. "You haven't worked a single day in 28 years. I pay for everything. So you'd better not ask about things that don't concern you." 30 years. An entire marriage of saying yes, and I'm sorry. That very night, I found something my father had left me 31 years ago. And everything changed. The words "I'm sorry" would never leave my mouth again. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where are you watching from. What city, what country I love, knowing who's in this community with me. And one more thing, this story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and reflection. Any similarity to actual names or places is purely coincidental, but the message it carries, that part is worth keeping. I was washing the last bowl when he walked in. I didn't turn around. I knew his footsteps, 30 years of knowing exactly how heavy they landed depending on his mood. Tonight they were slow, deliberate. The kind of slow that meant he had already decided something. The sound of paper hitting granite made me flinch. "Look at that," he said. I turned off the water, looked down at the counter. A resort invoice. Sedona. 2 nights, $4,200 charged to our joint card. My chest tightened. I kept my voice even. "What is this? What does it look like?" "It looks like a hotel bill for a trip I wasn't on." He leaned against the counter across from me, arms crossed, completely relaxed. And I'd like to know who you took." He smiled. Not a cruel smile, something worse than that. Patient. Like I was a child asking a question he'd already answered twice. "You're going to stand there and make this into something it isn't." "I'm asking a simple question, Richard. And I'm telling you," he pushed off the counter, stepped closer, "that you don't get to ask that question. You live in this house. You drive that car. You haven't worked a single day in 28 years. His voice never rose. Not once. "I pay for all of it. Every single thing. So when I tell you something doesn't concern you," he tapped the invoice with one finger, "it doesn't concern you." I looked at his hand on the invoice, then at his face. "So that's where we are," I said quietly. "That's where we've always been." He straightened up, tugged his sleeve. "You just forgot for a minute." He walked out of the kitchen. I heard the hallway, the bedroom door, the click of the lock. I stood there alone in the amber light above the stove, the only light he'd left on. My hands were still damp. I pressed them flat against the counter right next to the invoice. $4,200, 2 nights. A resort I'd suggested we visit together 3 years ago. He'd said he was too busy. I picked up the invoice and read it once slowly all the way through. Then I set it back down. I had been saying yes my whole marriage. Yes quietly. Yes quickly. Yes because it was easier than the silence that followed no. But standing there in that kitchen, something shifted low and quiet, the way a foundation shifts before anyone notices the crack in the wall. I turned off the faucet. I put the bowl away. And for the first time in 30 years, I did not say I was sorry. Task 1.2. 20 minutes after his bedroom door clicked shut, I was still standing in the same kitchen. Not because I was frozen, not because I was crying. I wasn't crying. I was thinking about a drawer. The third one down left of the sink. I had opened it 10,000 times for scissors, for rubber bands, for the takeout menus I never threw away. I knew exactly what was in it. I had always known. I just had never needed what was at the very back. I crossed the kitchen and pulled it open. Under the menus, under the scissors, under a birthday card I'd saved from 2019. There it was. A small notebook, brown leather cover worn soft at the corners. My father's handwriting on the front, just 2 letters, M.E. My initials, Margaret Ellen. My father had pressed it into my hands 3 days before my wedding. "Keep this somewhere safe," he'd said. "Somewhere only you know." I had never opened it after he died. 7 years and I had never opened it. I opened it now. The inside front cover. His handwriting, blue ink, faded to the color of an old sky, one line written slowly, the way he wrote everything important. "Don't sign anything when you're being pressured. Remember that, sweetheart." I pressed my fingers against the words. The ink was dry and slightly raised, the way ink gets when someone presses hard because they mean every word. Below it, a phone number, an area code I recognized, Phoenix, and a name, Gerald Holt, Estate and Trust Attorney. I stood there and read the line again. "Don't sign anything when you're being pressured." He had written this 31 years ago, before the wedding, before the house, before 28 years of yes quietly, and yes quickly, and yes because it was easier. He had known. Not that this specific night would happen, but that a night like this could. He had known, and he had prepared, and he had put the preparation in the back of a drawer and trusted me to find it when I needed it. The kitchen was completely silent. Somewhere down the hall, I heard the faint sound of the television in the bedroom. I looked at the phone number for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. It was past 9 o'clock on a Friday night. I knew the call would go to voicemail. I dialed anyway. "You've reached Gerald Holt. Please leave a message, and I'll return your call." I waited for the beep. "Mr. Holt," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "My name is Margaret. My father was William Marsh. He told me to call you if I ever needed to." I paused. "I think I need to." I ended the call, set the phone face down on the counter. My father had prepared for this day. The question that stayed with me standing there in that quiet kitchen, his notebook in my hand, was whether I had. I didn't get up off the floor right away. I sat there with the notebook open on my knees, and I turned to page 1. I don't know what I expected, a letter maybe. Something warm, something a father writes to a daughter he loves before her wedding day. What I found was a spreadsheet. Property addresses, account numbers, bank names, institution contacts, all in my father's handwriting, tight, precise, the same hand that kept the ledgers at his building supply store for 40 years. At the top of the page, underlined twice with a ruler: Living Trust, Margaret Ellen Marsh. Premarital assets only. Independent trustee, Gerald Holt, Esquire. I turned to page 2. More numbers. A Phoenix safety deposit box address. Routing codes I didn't fully understand yet. And then in the bottom right corner, in slightly smaller print, the way my father always saved the most important thing for last. Audit clause activates under 3 conditions. 1, documented financial misuse. 2, documented infidelity. 3, evidence of coerced signing. Call Gerald. He knows exactly what to do. I stopped breathing for a second. Then I looked up. The Sedona invoice was still on the counter above me. White paper, white quartz. $4,200. 2 nights. A resort he'd told me 3 years ago he was too busy to visit with me. Financial misuse. I thought about that joint card, the one he said was for household expenses. Documented infidelity. I thought about that afternoon, the white Range Rover pulling up in front of our house, a woman in a red dress stepping out, my husband walking around to open her door, the way I had stood at the kitchen window and told myself, "You didn't see what you think you saw." I had been telling myself that for months. Coerced signing. I thought about his voice 20 minutes ago. "You live in this house. You drive that car. You don't get to ask that question." His hand tapping the invoice like a period at the end of a sentence. 3 conditions. All 3, tonight in this kitchen. I sat on that floor for a long moment and felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not sadness, something quieter than both. The feeling of finally understanding the rules of a game I had been losing without knowing I was playing. I stood up, went back to the drawer, found a pen, turned to the first blank page at the very back of the notebook, and I wrote slowly the way my father taught me, the way I used to write entries in his store ledger when I was 19 years old. August 16th, 2024, 9:34 p.m., Sedona Resort. 2 nights, $4,200, joint card, invoice left on kitchen counter by husband, entry 1. I underlined entry 1. Then I looked at what I had written. He had stood in this kitchen an hour ago and told me to remember my place. Fine. I remembered it now clearly for the first time in years. My name on a trust he didn't know existed. A lawyer who had been waiting 30 years for my call. A notebook full of numbers that told a story he thought no one was keeping. He thought I was silent because I had nothing to say. He was wrong. I was silent because I was counting. Task 1.4. I sat there on the kitchen floor a little longer after I wrote that first entry. Not because I had more to write, just because I wasn't ready to move yet. The notebook was open on my knees, the pen still in my hand, and the kitchen was so quiet I could hear the clock above the stove tick through every second. Entry 1. 2 lines, a date, a number, a fact. It wasn't much, but it was the first true thing I had written in 30 years. I finally got up, put the notebook back in the drawer, and went to bed. Richard was already asleep, or pretending to be, which with him amounted to the same thing. I lay in the dark beside him and stared at the ceiling and felt for the first time in a long time like I was waiting for something instead of hiding from it. I was up before 6. He was already gone. No coffee made no note, just his cologne still faint in the hallway, and his coffee mug rinsed and upturned in the drying rack, the one small domestic habit he'd never broken in 30 years. I used to find it endearing. I made my own coffee and sat at the kitchen table. That's when I noticed the brochure. It was sitting on the far end of the table, half folded, the way he left things he considered unimportant. Glossy paper, heavy stock, the kind printed for people who needed to feel the money before they spent it. Desert Summit Annual Partner Recognition Evening, Paradise Valley, Arizona, December 28, 2025. I picked it up and read it slowly. Inside, lead investors, senior banking partners, a dinner program, a project showcase. The kind of room where handshakes became signed contracts and reputations were made or quietly buried, depending on who said what to whom. I had attended last year's event. I remembered every minute of it. The drive to Paradise Valley, Richard, in his charcoal suit, telling me to just smile and let him handle the conversation. 4 hours standing beside him in a dress he had chosen, holding a drink I barely touched. When one of his partners turned to me and asked what I did, Richard answered before I could speak. She keeps the home running, the important work. Everyone laughed warmly. I smiled. This year the brochure sat on the table without a word from him. No clear your schedule. No, you'll come with me. Just a glossy reminder that I had been quietly uninvited from the most important night of his professional year. I read it all the way through to the last page, the guest list. The 3 banking partners whose signatures Richard needed to close his largest development deal. The venue address in Paradise Valley. Then I folded it carefully along its original crease and walked to the 3rd drawer left of the sink. I placed it in the back, right next to my father's notebook. My father used to say, leaning back in his office chair with that quiet certainty he carried everywhere, "Timing matters more than argument, Margaret. You can be completely right and still lose if you show your hand too early." I hadn't thought about that in 10 years. I closed the drawer. I didn't have a plan yet, not even close. I had one entry in a notebook and a phone call sitting in an attorney's voicemail. But I had a date. December 28th, 2025. A room full of the men whose approval Richard valued above everything else in his life, including me. I went back to the table and finished my coffee. And for the first time in a very long time, I let myself think about what timing actually meant. The coffee went cold while I sat there. And somewhere between the silence and the empty chair across from me, I stopped thinking about December and started thinking about 31 years ago. The week before my wedding, my father called me into his office at the store. Not the house, the office. The small room behind the warehouse where sawdust and dry cement came through the walls, and every surface was buried in invoices and coffee rings. That room meant serious business. He was sitting behind his desk when I walked in, documents stacked in front of him. He pointed at the chair without looking up. "Sit, read these." "Dad, You've read nothing. Sit." 40 minutes. A prenuptial agreement, a living trust in my name, a trustee appointment letter for Gerald Holt. My father sat across from me the entire time without saying a word. When I turned the last page, he spoke. "You understand what that is? A trust. My premarital assets. Independent trustee. Your trustee, not mine." He leaned forward. "Your Aunt Clara lost her house in '87, signed everything to Frank because he said he'd handle it, and she trusted him because he was her husband. 14 years of marriage, 2 suitcases when she left." He paused. "Cousin Diane. Same story, different man, different year. Same 2 suitcases." "Richard isn't like that," I said. "I know he isn't. I like Richard." He said it simply, no argument. "This isn't about him. It's about you." "Then what is it about?" He looked at me the way he looked at his ledgers, steady, no room for sentiment. "You worked my books every summer from 16 to 22. You caught 3 billing errors my accountant missed. 3. He tapped the trust document. "That means you understand numbers better than you think, better than most people in your life will ever give you credit for." I looked at Gerald Holt's name on the page. "And if I never need this?" I asked. My father picked up his coffee, looked into the cup, set it down. "Then it's paperwork collecting dust." He met my eyes. "But if the day comes, you won't be starting from nothing. That's the only difference between you and Clara and Diane." I signed everything that afternoon. Then I drove home and didn't think about it again for 31 years. My coffee was cold. I carried the cup to the sink and poured it out. My father had been gone 7 years, but sitting in that kitchen on the morning of August 17th, I heard his voice clearer than I had since the day we buried him. "You won't be starting from nothing." He had been right about so many things. I was beginning to think he had been right about this too. Task 2.2. 2 weeks after that night in the kitchen, Linda knocked on my door. Linda Chambers, my neighbor for 11 years, retired, 911 dispatcher, the kind of woman who noticed everything and said only what mattered. When she knocked with that particular quiet knock, I knew it wasn't about borrowed sugar. "Come sit with me," she said. "Out back." We sat on her patio in the late afternoon, the Arizona sun dropping low and turning everything copper. She didn't say anything for a moment, just held her phone in both hands the way people hold something they're not sure they should give you. "I've been sitting on this for 2 weeks, she finally said. "I didn't want to show you something that would hurt you if I was wrong." She looked at me. "But I don't think I'm wrong." She turned the phone toward me. Her doorbell camera footage. The timestamp read 11:23 a.m.a. Tuesday 3 weeks ago, the day Richard had texted me he was out surveying a new project site. A white Range Rover autobiography pulled up in front of our house. Richard got out of the driver's side. He walked around the front of the car, not the back, the front deliberately, and opened the passenger door. A woman stepped out. Red dress, dark hair, younger. She said something to him and he laughed the way he used to laugh easily before everything between us became managed and careful. Then the audio caught a fragment as they walked toward the front door. Her voice clear enough. "Has to be done by end of year. You understand that, right? We can't keep waiting." The clip ended. 37 seconds total. Linda was watching my face. "Honey, are you okay?" I looked at the black screen for a moment. Then I held out my hand. "Can I see it again?" She gave me the phone. I watched it a second time, slower. I watched the way he put his hand briefly at the small of her back as they reached the front step. I watched the way she leaned slightly toward him when she spoke, comfortable, familiar, not careful at all. "Has to be done by end of year." I handed the phone back. "I'm okay," I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me slightly. "I need a copy of that clip, Linda. Can you send it to my phone?" She stared at me. "That's it. You're not going to—" "I'm okay," I said again. "I promise. Just send me the clip." She did. I walked home and the last of the copper light went straight to the kitchen, opened the third drawer, and took out the notebook. I turned to the second entry page and wrote, August 2024, Range Rover White Autobiography. Our driveway, 11:23 a.m. Richard present. Woman in red dress. Audio end of year can't keep waiting. Doorbell cam footage saved. I underlined saved. Then I closed the notebook and stood very still in the quiet kitchen. Confirmation was supposed to feel different than suspicion. I had always imagined it would feel worse. But standing there, I realized it didn't feel worse at all. It felt like the second entry in a ledger that was only going to get longer. Task 2.3. Daniel showed up Sunday evening with groceries nobody asked for. That was my son. 34 years old, same quiet eyes as my father, the kind of man who brought food instead of flowers because he understood practical things lasted longer. Richard wasn't home. He hadn't been home before 9 on a Sunday in 3 months. We settled in the living room after dinner, me sorting newspapers, Daniel on the couch pretending to read. The house was too quiet in the way it had been getting quietly too quiet for a while now. "Where's Dad?" he asked. Casual, eyes still on his book. "Meeting. On a Sunday. Big project year." He nodded. Didn't say anything for a moment. Then he set his book down. "Mom, he's been late a lot this month. You know how he gets in Q4. This isn't Q4, it's September." I folded a newspaper. "Daniel, I'm just saying." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I called the house 3 times last week. You always picked up. He never did." "He's busy." "Mom." The way he said it, quiet, direct, no room for a detour. "Are you okay?" I looked up at him. My son Richard's jawline, my father's eyes, 34 years old, and already too perceptive for his own good. "I'm fine," I said. "I promise." He held my gaze. Didn't believe me. Didn't push either, just looked around the room the way you look at a place when you're trying to read it. Richard's reading glasses not on the armrest where he always left them. His side lamp off. His chair empty in a way that had started to feel permanent. Daniel saw all of it. I watched him see it. "If something's going on," he said carefully, "you'd tell me, right?" "Of course. Because you don't have to protect me, Mom. I'm not 12. "I know you're not. So if something—" "Daniel." I set the newspaper down and looked at him steadily. "When there's something to tell, I'll tell you. I need you to trust me on that." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he exhaled and sat back. "Okay," he said, "okay." He stayed another hour, made tea, sat in the kitchen while I wiped the counters talking about nothing, his work, a movie, he'd seen the Suns' preseason odds. normal things. As if he'd decided that if I wouldn't let him in yet, the least he could do was stay close to the door. He hugged me tight before he left. "Call me," he said. "Anything, anytime." "I will." I closed the door and stood alone in the hallway. My son had seen something. He didn't know what it was yet, and neither did I, not the full shape of it. But I felt his worry settle over me like something heavy and warm at the same time. He was paying attention. I just needed him to wait. It started small. They always do. Mid-September. Breakfast. Richard behind his newspaper coffee, steaming the morning routine so practiced, it felt like furniture. I poured my cup and sat down across from him. "The phone bill came yesterday," I said. "It's $300 higher than last month." He turned a page. "Did you add a line or change the plan?" "I explained this already." Still not looking up. "You didn't actually. I would remember. Margaret." He folded the corner of the page down and looked at me over the top of the newspaper. Patient, slightly tired, the face of a man explaining something for the fourth time. "I told you about the international roaming charges 2 weeks ago. At dinner, you were sitting right there." He nodded toward my chair. I looked at my chair, then at him. "I don't remember that conversation." "I know you don't." He went back to his paper. "You've been forgetting things lately. It's okay. Just try to write things down." I sat with my coffee and said nothing. He hadn't explained the phone bill. I was certain of it, the same certainty I had about every number I'd ever tracked, every invoice I'd ever filed, every entry I'd written in that notebook. I didn't forget numbers. I never had. But I said nothing. I just sat there and felt the first thin thread of doubt he'd planted, and chose very deliberately not to pick it up. The following Saturday, we had 2 of Richard's colleagues over for dinner. Halfway through the evening, I realized I'd left my keys on the kitchen counter instead of the hook by the door. A small thing, the kind of thing anyone does. Richard noticed before I did. "Found your keys again, hon." He held them up with a warm smile, turning to his colleagues. "She's been a little scattered lately, memory stuff. We're keeping an eye on it." A sympathetic chuckle around the table. "You know how it is at our age, right?" Laughter. Easy, gentle, the kind that assumes no harm was meant. I smiled, picked up my wine glass, said, "What would I do without you?" Everyone laughed again. After the guests left, after the dishes were done, after Richard had gone to bed, I went to the kitchen drawer. I opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote, September 2024. "Memory problems, said to guests. Keys on counter used as evidence. Public. Laughed along. Count 1. I underlined count 1. Then I closed the notebook and put it back. He wanted me to question myself, to second-guess what I remembered, what I heard, what I knew to be true. Chip away at my confidence until I was too uncertain to act. He didn't know I had been keeping records since August. He didn't know there was a count. Gary Pittman had done our taxes for 11 years. Pleasant man. Organized. Always had a bowl of wrapped mints on his desk and a habit of clicking his pen when he was thinking. I had never had a reason to distrust him. Our annual meeting was a routine I could have done in my sleep, 45 minutes. Same questions, same forms, same small talk about the Arizona heat on the way out. I arrived at his Tempe office at 2 o'clock, took my usual chair across from his dark wood desk, and we moved through the standard items without incident. Then he flipped to the 3rd page and said without looking up, "Now that investment account, the one from before the marriage, any changes to that this year?" I stopped. He was still looking at the page, pen ready, completely relaxed, as if he'd asked about the weather. "I'm sorry," I said. "The premarital account." He glanced up. "Just want to make sure nothing's changed for reporting purposes." I kept my voice even. "Gary, how do you know about that account?" A pause. Small, but there. His pen stopped clicking. "Oh." He smiled easy, unbothered. "I think you mentioned it last year. In passing. I just kept a note." I looked at him. I had never mentioned it. Not last year, not the year before. Not in 11 years of sitting in that chair. That account existed in my father's trust documents and nowhere else. I had never written it on a tax form. I had never said the words premarital account in this office. Not once. I was certain of it the way I was certain of every number I had ever tracked. "Right," I said, "no changes." He nodded and moved on to the next item. Professional, efficient, completely normal. I answered the rest of his questions, signed where he indicated accepted my mint on the way out, and drove home in the late afternoon sun. I sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes with the notebook in front of me. I didn't write anything. I just thought Gary Pittman had information I never gave him. That meant someone else had. and the only person who knew about my father's trust, who had any reason to share it with our accountant, was the man who had been telling me for weeks that I was forgetting things. I thought about the phone bill. I already explained this. I thought about the dinner party. Memory stuff. We're keeping an eye on it. I thought about Gary's pen clicking and then stopping. I still didn't write anything. Sometimes you needed to sit with something long enough to be sure you weren't imagining it. I wasn't imagining it. A week after the Tempe meeting, I called Gary Pittman's office. Not about taxes. I had found a line item in the household account I couldn't identify, a transfer to a vendor name I didn't recognize, 4 figures, no description. The kind of thing I would have ignored a year ago. I wasn't ignoring things anymore. His receptionist picked up. I asked for a private appointment, just the two of us. No agenda sent in advance. She put me on hold, came back, confirmed Thursday at 3. I wrote it in my calendar, showed up Thursday at 2:55. His receptionist looked up from her desk with an apologetic smile before I even reached the front desk. "Mrs. Calloway, I'm so sorry. Gary had something come up this morning. He had to reschedule all his afternoon appointments." I stood at the front desk for a moment. "Did he say when he's available?" "He'll call you to reschedule, probably next week." He didn't call. I waited 10 days and called again myself. New appointment, Tuesday at 4, confirmed. I was in the garden the following Monday afternoon when my phone rang. Gary's office number. "Mrs. Calloway, I'm so sorry something's come up again. Gary asked me to reschedule for the following week if that works for you." I stood there in the late sun phone against my ear, looking at nothing in particular. "Of course," I said. "That's fine." I hung up and stayed in the garden a few minutes longer. 2 appointments, 2 cancellations, no specific reason either. Time, just something came up. Something's come up again, the vague language of people who have been told what to say, but not why. Gary Pittman had done our taxes for 11 years. He had never once canceled on me. Not when his mother was in the hospital, not during tax season when his office was running on 4 hours of sleep. 11 years, and he had been as reliable as the forms he filed. Now twice in 3 weeks he couldn't find 45 minutes. I didn't call to reschedule a third time. Instead, I went inside, opened the third drawer, and took out the notebook. I turned to a fresh page and wrote, October 2024. Attempted private meeting with CPA twice. Canceled both times. No reason given. No rescheduling offered. I looked at what I'd written. Then I added one line below it. He knows what I want to ask. Someone told him not to answer. I didn't know that for certain. Not yet. But I had learned something in the past 2 months. The difference between forgetting and being managed was always in the pattern. 1 cancellation was inconvenient. 2 was a decision. The envelope looked ordinary. White standard size, my name and address printed cleanly on the front. I pulled it from the mailbox on a Tuesday morning in early November, carried it inside with the rest of the mail, and set it on the kitchen counter while I poured my coffee. I almost didn't open it first, but the return address stopped me. A boutique name I didn't recognize, Old Town Scottsdale. A store I had never visited. I set my coffee down and opened it. An invoice, itemized. 2 handbags, 1 silk blouse, 1 pair of shoes. Total $2,340. Payment method credit card, ending in the 4 digits of our joint account. Billing name Margaret Calloway. Billing address our home address. Delivery address somewhere on Camelback Road I had never been. I read it twice. Then I turned it over as if the back might explain something the front didn't. I had never set foot in that boutique. I had never ordered anything from it. I had never given anyone permission to bill my name to a delivery going to a Camelback Road address. But there was my name. There was our joint card. There was our home address used as the billing anchor to make the transaction look like mine. I sat down at the kitchen table with the invoice flat in front of me. My first instinct was anger. My second instinct, the one that had been getting sharper since August, was something colder, more careful. Why would someone put my name on a purchase delivered somewhere else? I thought about it for a long moment. If there was ever a legal dispute, a billing record in my name meant I was the purchaser. If Richard later claimed I had approved certain expenditures, if he needed to show a pattern of joint spending, I had participated in an invoice in my name, never disputed, never returned, would sit in a file somewhere looking exactly like my signature. Silence in certain situations counted as consent. I had been silent for 30 years. I understood exactly how silence worked. I got up, went to the drawer, and took out the notebook. November 4th, 2024. Invoice received, Old Town Scottsdale Boutique, $2,340. Joint card, billing name mine. Delivery address Camelback Road, not our home. Item clothing, never purchased by me. I paused, then added, someone used my name on purpose. This was not a mistake. I underlined the last sentence. Then I picked up my phone and looked up the boutique's address. I had some questions for whoever ran that store. Task 3.2. The boutique was on a quiet stretch of Old Town Scottsdale, glass front warm, lighting the kind of store that kept its best pieces in the window and its prices off the tags. I walked in on a Wednesday morning wearing my usual gray cardigan, dark slacks, the Subaru keys still in my hand. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman in her 60s who had no business being in a store like this. The manager came forward anyway, mid-40s professional, the practiced smile of someone who could read a room. "Good morning. Can I help you find something?" "Actually, yes." I opened my purse and placed the invoice on the glass counter between us. "I received this at my home last week. My name is on the billing, but I didn't make this purchase." She looked at the invoice. Something shifted in her expression, not guilt, more like recognition. "Let me pull up the account," she said. She turned to her computer, typed, scrolled. I waited. "Okay." She looked up carefully. "This order was placed in person about 6 weeks ago. The customer requested the billing go to your address. She was specific about that. Said to use the name on file." "The name on file," I repeated. "Which name was that?" A pause. "Yours, ma'am, Margaret Calloway." "And the customer, can you describe her?" She hesitated. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said quietly. "I just need to understand how my name ended up on a purchase I didn't make." She considered that for a moment. Then, "She came in with a man, older than her mid-60s maybe. Nice watch, rose gold. She did most of the talking. He mostly just approved things." Rose gold watch. I knew that watch. I had given it to Richard for our 25th anniversary. "Did she say anything else?" I asked. "Anything you remember?" The manager glanced at the invoice, then back at me. She lowered her voice slightly. She said, and I remember because it struck me as odd, she said, "Send the bill to the home address. His wife will understand. She always does." The store was very quiet for a moment. "Thank you," I said. I folded the invoice and put it back in my purse. "That's everything I needed." I walked out into the Scottsdale sun and sat in my car for 5 full minutes without starting the engine. "His wife will understand. She always does." I took out my phone, opened the notebook app I'd started using as a backup, and typed the manager's words in full verbatim with the date and store address. Then I drove home and added it to the paper record. They hadn't just spent the money. They had used my name deliberately, and they had told a witness exactly what they were doing. Task 3.3. I sat on the edge of the bed that afternoon with my laptop open and every invoice I'd collected spread across the comforter beside me. 8 of them. I hadn't realized it was 8 until I laid them all out. 3 from the Old Town Boutique, 2 resort receipts, Sedona, then Scottsdale, 1 from a jewelry store in Fashion Square, 2 from a company called Meridian Interior Solutions, billed as design consultation fees, all of them charged to our joint account, all of them with my name somewhere in the billing field. I opened a spreadsheet, the first one I'd built since my father's store, and started entering figures. Boutique purchases $47,200. Jewelry, $83,400. Resort stays, $18,200. Meridian Interior Solutions, $231,000. I stopped at that last number, $231,000 billed as interior design consulting. I looked up Meridian Interior Solutions on the Arizona Business Registry, registered 8 months ago. Listed business address a suite on Camelback Road, the same street as the boutique delivery address. I sat back and looked at the total at the bottom of my spreadsheet. $379,800 in 6 months from our joint account. While he told me the business was in its most expensive development phase and we needed to be careful with personal spending, I had returned a pair of boots last March because they were $40 more than I wanted to spend. But I kept looking at the numbers, not at the amount at the structure. The boutique bills in my name, the resort charges that could be framed as joint travel, the consulting fees buried under a legitimate-sounding company name, and all of it sitting in our joint account history with my name attached, never disputed, never questioned. If this ever went to court, a lawyer would look at this record and see a wife who had been aware of the spending for months and said nothing. Silence as consent again. And if Richard's attorney needed to argue that I had diminished capacity, that I forgot things, that my memory wasn't reliable, there were already 2 dinner party witnesses who had laughed warmly at the joke about my memory problems. I closed the spreadsheet. They weren't just stealing from our account, they were building a file. A careful, patient, layered file designed to leave me with nothing to stand on if I ever tried to stand up. The blueprint had been in front of me for months. I just hadn't seen the whole drawing until now. I opened the notebook. November 2024, total confirmed $379,800. 6 months. Joint account. Pattern my name on billing delivery elsewhere. Structure designed to establish my awareness and consent. I paused, then wrote one more line. They are building a case against me. I am building one too. Mine started first. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I was afraid, because I kept doing the math. By 4 a.m, I gave up on sleep, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the spreadsheet printed out in front of me. 6 months of transactions, 4 categories, one total that kept sitting in my chest like something swallowed wrong. $379,800. I thought about what that number meant in real terms. Not abstractly, concretely. The house we'd bought in 1998 for $340,000. Daniel's entire college education. The building supply store my father had run for 30 years sold after he died for $410,000, every dollar of which was sitting in the trust Gerald Holt managed and Richard didn't know existed. $379,800 in 6 months, from the account he told me he controlled. I went through each line again. The boutique charges $47,200 spread across 11 transactions, never more than $6,000 at once. Small enough that each one looked like a business expense. Large enough that together they bought a wardrobe. The jewelry, $83,400. 3 purchases. Fashion Square, then Scottsdale Quarter, then Fashion Square again. I pulled up the jewelry store websites on my phone. High-end. The kind of pieces that photographed well. The resort's $18,200. Sedona twice, Scottsdale once. I remembered the Sedona invoice landing on this same counter 3 months ago, the beginning of everything. And then Meridian Interior Solutions, $231,000. I kept coming back to that number. $231,000 to a company that had existed for 8 months, registered to an address connected to a woman in a red dress who had stood at my front door and talked about end-of-year deadlines. I picked up my pen and drew a slow line under the total. $379,800, underlined 3 times. Then I wrote in the margin beside it the way my father used to annotate his ledgers when something needed immediate attention. 6 months, family money, not asked, not disclosed. I set the pen down and looked at what I had built the spreadsheet. The invoices sorted by date, the notebook entries running alongside them like a parallel record. 2 columns of truth. Every number sourced, every date, confirmed, every transaction traceable back to a joint account that bore both our names. He had spent 30 years telling me I didn't understand money. I understood it perfectly. I had always understood it. I had just been quiet about it the same way I had been quiet about everything else. The kitchen was beginning to lighten with the early morning. 5:15. Richard wouldn't be up for another 2 hours. I gathered the papers, carefully returned them to the folder, and put the folder in the back of the 3rd drawer next to the notebook and the Desert Summit brochure. The drawer was getting full. Good. He called on a Tuesday night in early December. I was in the living room when my phone lit up with his name. I picked up on the 2nd ring. Hey, sweetheart. Silence for a beat, then, Mom, I need to ask you something. I recognized that voice. Not the words, the tone. The same tone he'd used as a teenager when he'd found something he wasn't sure he was supposed to find. Of course, I said. What is it? I've been looking at the family card statements. A pause. The one Dad added me to back in 2019 for emergencies. I still get the monthly summary emails. I was very still. Okay? Mom, the charges this year. He stopped. Started again. There's a company called Meridian Interior Solutions, $230,000 since April. I looked them up. They registered in February, 8 months old. No website, no reviews, no projects listed anywhere. Another pause. And there are boutique charges, resort stays, a jewelry store in Fashion Square 3 times. I didn't say anything. Mom, his voice dropped. What is Dad spending this money on? I looked at the wall across from me, measured my next words carefully. Daniel, don't tell me it's a project expense. I know what project expenses look like. This isn't that. I know what it is, I said quietly. Silence. You know, his voice shifted, not anger, something rawer than that. How long have you known? Since August. August. He said it like a word in a foreign language he was translating slowly. Mom, it's December. You've known since August and you didn't. I needed to handle it my way, I said. On my timeline, not yours. Your timeline. I could hear him pacing. Mom, he's spending family money on what exactly? On who? I can't tell you everything yet, but I need you to listen to me very carefully. I kept my voice steady. Do not call your father. Do not confront him. Do not touch those statements. Can you do that? You're asking me to do nothing. I'm asking you to trust me. There's a difference. A long silence, the kind that meant he was fighting himself. Are you safe? He finally asked. The question caught me off guard. I hadn't expected that one. Yes, I said, completely. And you have a plan? I'm building one. He exhaled slowly. How long do you need? I thought about the drawer in the kitchen, the notebook, the folder, the Desert Summit brochure dated December 28th, 2025. A year, I said. Maybe less. Another silence. Then, okay. Quiet, steady. His grandfather's voice. Okay, Mom. I trust you. I closed my eyes for a second. Thank you, Daniel. But you call me, he said. The minute you need me. Promise me. I promise. He came home at 5:30 on a Wednesday. That alone was unusual enough to make me look up from the book I wasn't really reading. He was carrying flowers. Yellow tulips, a full bunch wrapped in brown paper, the kind from an actual florist rather than a grocery store display. He held them out toward me with a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. For you, he said. I looked at the tulips, then at him. Yellow tulips had been my favorite for as long as I could remember. I had mentioned it exactly once at a dinner party in 2009 in passing, the way you mention small preferences you don't expect anyone to retain. Richard had remembered. After 15 years, he had remembered. Thank you, I said. I took them and went to find a vase. He followed me into the kitchen, loosened his tie, leaned against the counter the way he used to on ordinary evenings before ordinary evenings stopped existing between us. How are you feeling? He asked. You seem tired lately. I'm fine. I ran water into the vase. Just the usual. We should go to dinner this weekend. Just the two of us. His voice was warm, unhurried. That Italian place in Old Town you like. We haven't been in a while. That sounds nice. I mean it. He moved slightly closer. I feel like we've both been distracted lately. Ships passing, you know I don't like it. I arranged the tulips in the vase and set them on the windowsill. They were genuinely beautiful. That was the hardest part. They were genuinely perfectly beautiful. He had chosen well. I'd like that, I said. Dinner sounds good. He smiled, relieved, warm, completely convincing, and went to change out of his suit. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the tulips for a moment. Then I opened the third drawer, took out the notebook, sat down at the table and wrote. December 2024, Yellow Tulips Florist, not grocery. Suggested dinner just the two of us. Asked how I was feeling, called me honey twice. Has not done any of this in 4 months. I paused, tapped the pen against the page once, then added, people bring flowers before they ask for something, always. In 30 years, I have never once seen an exception to this rule. Waiting, I closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. In the living room, I could hear him on the phone, low voice, quick, the call wrapped up in under a minute, the way he wrapped up calls he didn't want overheard. The tulips stood in the window, yellow and perfect. I went back to my book and waited to find out what they were going to cost me. Gary Pittman called me the 3rd week of December. Not his receptionist. Gary himself. He wanted to meet his suggestion, this time his schedule, no cancellations. I found that interesting. His Tempe office looked the same as always. Dark wood desk tax code binders on the shelves, the bowl of wrapped mints by the door. He stood when I came in, which he didn't usually do, and gestured to the chair across from him with both hands, which he also didn't usually do. Small things. I notice small things now. Thanks for coming in, he said, settling back into his seat. I wanted to go over something I flagged when I was reviewing year-end projections. Of course. I folded my hands in my lap. What did you find? He opened a folder and turned it toward me. Pages of figures, account summaries, transaction categories, projected tax exposure. His finger landed on a highlighted line. This consulting expense, Meridian Interior Solutions, $231,000. He looked up. The way it's currently structured, it's going to raise flags. The company has no public profile, no prior relationship with your household accounts, and the transaction volume is inconsistent with the reported project scope. He paused. If the IRS pulls this for review, you and Richard would both need to explain it. Jointly. I looked at the highlighted number. I see. Now there's a way to address this proactively. He leaned forward slightly. A restructuring of certain accounts, simplifying the joint holdings, clarifying what flows where, would make the picture cleaner, more defensible. Restructuring, I said. Standard practice in situations like this. Reduces exposure for both parties. I looked at him for a moment. He held my gaze steadily, too steadily, the way people look at you when they've rehearsed looking relaxed. "Gary," I said quietly, "who asked you to have this meeting?" A pause. His pen clicked once. I flagged this myself during, "Was it Richard?" Another pause, shorter this time, but there. "I have obligations to both parties on a joint return." "That's not what I asked." He looked down at the folder, straightened a page that didn't need straightening. "I think the important thing right now is making sure you're both protected going forward." I picked up my purse from the floor beside my chair. "Thank you for your time, Gary," I said. I stood up. "I'll need to review everything with my own counsel before I agree to any restructuring." He blinked. "Your own?" "My own attorney, yes." I smiled at him. "You understand. Just being careful." I took a mint from the bowl on my way out. A small thing, but I'd earned it. That evening I opened the notebook. December 2024. Gary called, meeting himself first time ever. Pushed restructuring. Would not confirm who initiated. Did not deny. The tulips were the warm-up. This is the ask. Richard's colleague hosted a holiday party the second week of January. A sprawling house in North Scottsdale, the kind with a pool that glowed turquoise at night, and enough outdoor heaters to make 65 degrees feel like summer. I wore the navy dress I'd had for 4 years. Richard wore the charcoal suit. We arrived together, which meant nothing. I spent the first hour doing what I always did at these events, moving slowly around the edges, refilling my water glass, listening more than I spoke. Richard worked the room in wide circles, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments, performing the version of himself that had built a career. I was standing near the drinks table when she appeared beside me. Red dress, dark hair, younger than me by at least 25 years. I recognized her immediately, the woman from the doorbell cam, the boutique delivery address, the Range Rover passenger seat. She didn't recognize me. Why would she? To her, I was just another woman in navy at a party full of people she was trying to impress. "Beautiful evening," she said, reaching past me for a glass of sparkling water. "It is," I agreed. She settled beside me with the ease of someone comfortable in rooms like this. We talked about nothing for a moment, the weather, the house, the catering. She was charming, genuinely charming. I could see exactly why that would be useful to someone. Then, as if the thought had just occurred to her naturally in the flow of conversation, she turned slightly toward me. "Do you know much about trust law in Arizona? I've been trying to understand how premarital assets work if there's a restructuring during the marriage. Like, can they be converted to joint property if the spouse signs a consent agreement?" I looked at her. The question was precise, technical, the kind of question you asked after spending time with a very specific attorney researching a very specific situation. A furniture saleswoman didn't ask that question at a cocktail party, not unless someone had asked her to find out. "I'm not sure," I said pleasantly. "I don't know much about that area of law." "Oh, I just thought," she smiled, "women our age, you know. We should understand these things, protect ourselves." "Women our age." She was 38 at most. "Absolutely," I said, "very wise." She smiled again and drifted toward another group. I let her go. I had recognized her the moment she walked in the doorbell cam, the red dress, the Range Rover passenger seat. But recognition was not the same as reaction. I had learned that much in the past 5 months. I watched her cross the patio, watched her find Richard near the outdoor bar, watched the brief exchange, a glance, a small nod from him, nothing a room full of colleagues would notice. I finished my water. She had been sent to find out whether I understood the trust structure, whether I was a threat, whether I knew what I was sitting on. I drove home that night thinking about her questions so specific, so carefully casual, and I felt something close to pity. She thought she was the one doing the research. She had no idea I had a 14-month head start. I found it by accident, mid-January. I was on the phone with our bank about a disputed charge. A small thing, a double billing from a grocery store, the kind of error that takes 4 minutes to fix. The representative was efficient, friendly, wrapping up the call and then said as a closing formality, "And just to confirm, all correspondence is still going to the business address on file." I stopped. "I'm sorry, what address?" A brief pause on her end. "The mailing address on the account. It was updated last May to a business address in Scottsdale. Would you like me to read it back?" "Please." She read an address I had never heard. A suite number. A street in North Scottsdale where Richard's company leased office space. "Who requested that change?" I asked. "It would have been an authorized account holder, ma'am. I don't have the specific request details in front of me, but the change was processed May 14th of last year." "May 14th. I thanked her, confirmed my grocery dispute, and hung up. I sat at the kitchen table and did the math. May 14th, 2024, 3 months before the night in the kitchen with the Sedona invoice, 3 months before he had thrown that receipt on the counter and told me to remember my place. He had rewrote our bank statements to his office 3 months before I found out anything was wrong, which meant by the time he stood in this kitchen performing outrage at my questions, 8 months of statements had already been quietly redirected. 8 months of transactions I had never seen. 8 months of a paper trail being built somewhere I couldn't reach. This was not a man who had made careless mistakes. This was a man who had been planning. I went to the drawer, took out the notebook, wrote, January 2024. Discovered joint account mailing address changed May 14th. 2024. Redirected to Richard's office. 8 months of statements never received at home. Change made without my knowledge or consent. I underlined May 14th twice. Then I sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. The Sedona invoice landing on the counter in August, the one he'd thrown down so casually, so certain I had no recourse, that wasn't arrogance. That was calculation. He had already hidden the paper trail. He had already redirected the evidence. He had already spent months making sure that if I ever started asking questions, I would be asking them blind. He had started this in May. I had started my notebook in August. He had a 3-month head start. But he didn't know about Gerald Holt. He didn't know about the trust. He didn't know about the third drawer in the kitchen, or the folder growing thicker every week, or the doorbell cam footage Linda had already sent to my phone. 3 months. I had spent 30 years being underestimated by this man. 3 months was nothing. Carol Whitfield invited me to coffee on a Tuesday morning in late January. She had been married to Richard's closest business partner for 22 years. We had never been close in the way women become close when they choose each other. We were close the way women become close when their husbands' schedules align. Tuesday morning coffee twice a month, the kind of friendship built on proximity rather than intention. But Carol was sharp, sharper than anyone in that circle gave her credit for. We sat in the back corner of a small cafe near our neighborhood. She ordered Earl Grey, I ordered coffee. She waited until the server left before she leaned forward slightly and said without preamble, "How bad is it?" I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Margaret." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I've known Richard for 20 years. I know what he looks like when he's managing something. And I've known you for 20 years. I know what you look like when you're letting him think he is." She paused. "So, how bad?" I was quiet for a moment, then bad enough. She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'm not going to ask you to tell me everything, but I need to ask you 3 questions. Just answer them honestly." "All right." "Who is the one person whose opinion Richard cannot afford to lose at that December event?" I didn't hesitate. "Thomas Brennan, senior partner at the bank financing the Paradise Valley project. Without Brennan's signature, the whole deal collapses." Carol nodded. "Second question, who physically approves the final documentation at closing, Richard or the bank?" "The bank issues conditional approval. Richard countersigns, but the bank has to move first." "Good." She took a slow sip of her tea. "Third question." She set the mug down and looked at me directly. "Is there anything in writing, anything at all that Richard cannot explain away if it lands on Thomas Brennan's table at the wrong moment?" I thought about the folder in the third drawer, the notebook, the doorbell cam footage, the boutique manager's statement, the bank address change dated May 14th, Gerald Holt's signed trustee documents. "Yes," I said. Carol sat back in her chair. For the first time since we'd sat down, she smiled, small, precise, satisfied. "Then you already know what to do," she said. "You just needed someone to ask the right questions." I looked at her for a moment. "You've done this before." "No." She picked up her mug again. "But I watched my mother do it. And she didn't have what you have." She nodded toward my purse, where the notebook sat at the bottom under my wallet. "She didn't have paperwork." I drove home thinking about Thomas Brennan. About December 28th. About a room full of people whose respect Richard had spent 30 years earning. My father's voice, quiet and certain timing matters more than argument. I finally understood exactly what he meant. I called Gerald Holt's office on a Monday morning in early February. Not his voicemail this time. His receptionist picked up on the second ring, and when I gave my name, there was a brief pause, the kind that meant he had told her to expect my call. "He has an opening Thursday at 2, she said. "Can you make that work?" "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." His office was in a brick building in downtown Phoenix. Old quiet, the kind of place that had been there long enough to stop trying to impress anyone. The elevator was slow. The hallway smelled like paper and wood polish. A framed photograph of the Arizona Supreme Court building hung outside his door, slightly crooked, never straightened. Gerald Holt was 64 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by anything decades ago. He stood when I walked in, shook my hand once firmly, gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Your father spoke about you often," he said, sitting back down. "He was very proud." "He was a good man," I said. "He was a careful man. There's a difference, and he understood it." He folded his hands on the desk. "You left a voicemail in August." "I did. And you're here now 5 months later, which tells me you spent those 5 months making sure you had something worth bringing." He looked at me steadily. "So, what did you bring?" I opened my bag and placed everything on his desk. The notebook, every entry dated, time-stamped, sourced. The printed spreadsheet with the $379,800 breakdown. The boutique invoices with my name on the billing. The bank statement showing the address change dated May 14th. Linda's doorbell cam footage on a USB drive. The boutique manager's written account signed and dated. Gerald didn't touch anything immediately. He looked at the pile for a moment. Then he picked up the notebook and read from the first entry, slowly, all the way through. When he finished, he set it down and picked up the spreadsheet, then the invoices, then the bank statement. 10 minutes passed without either of us speaking. Finally, he set everything down, aligned the edges of the papers with the quiet precision of a man who respected documents, and looked up. "Your father built this trust with 3 activation conditions," he said. "Financial misuse, documented infidelity, and coerced signing." He tapped the stack of papers once. "You have evidence supporting all 3. "Is it enough?" I asked. "It's more than enough to begin." He leaned back. "As independent trustee, I have the authority to initiate a formal audit and restrict account access pending review. Your husband cannot challenge that appointment. Your father made certain of it when he structured the document." "How long does the process take?" "Weeks, not months." "But Mrs. Calloway—" He paused. "I need you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Document everything. Change nothing in your behavior. Give him no reason to suspect the clock has started." I nodded. "He already thinks I forget things." Gerald almost smiled. "Good, let him." He walked me to the elevator. Before the doors closed, he said quietly, "Your father told me once that you were the most methodical person he'd ever taught to read a ledger." He looked at the stack of documents under my arm. He was right. The elevator doors closed. Outside, Phoenix was sharp and bright and warm for February. I sat in my car, and for the first time since August, I felt the weight shift, not disappear, just move, from my chest to somewhere more manageable. The clock had started, and I was the one who had started it. The bank statements had been coming to the house again since January. I had called to restore the home address the same week I discovered the May 14th change, quietly, without telling Richard, the way I did everything now. He hadn't noticed. Or if he had, he'd decided not to mention it, which meant he was either careless or confident. Either way, it worked in my favor. The February statement arrived on a Thursday morning. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and read it the way I read everything. Now, line by line, slowly, nothing skipped. Most of it was predictable. Household charges, utilities, his club membership, the usual patterns I had memorized months ago. Then I found it. January 3rd, a wire transfer. $250,000, outgoing. Recipient listed as Meridian Crestview, LLC. I set down my coffee cup. Meridian Crestview, LLC, was not the same as Meridian Interior Solutions, the consulting company I had already traced to the Camelback Road address. This was a new entity. I pulled up the Arizona Corporation Commission on my laptop and searched the name. Registered November 14th, 2024, 2 months before the transfer. Registered agent address a suite on Camelback Road. The same building. I searched further. Cross-referenced the suite number. It matched the address on the business card I had photographed at the boutique, the card the manager had shown me when I asked about the woman who placed the order. Her workplace. Her building. A new LLC registered in November, funded with $250,000 of joint money in January. I opened a property search on the Scottsdale MLS. Filtered by address, by the Camelback Corridor, by listings in the $1.8 to $2.1 million range. One result: a condominium in the Scottsdale Fashion Square Tower. Listing price, $1,950,000. Status under contract. Contract date, January 6th, 3 days after the wire transfer, I sat back in my chair. $250,000, our joint account, wired to an LLC she controlled, used 3 days later as a deposit on a $1.95 million condominium. I thought about her at that cocktail party. Premarital assets. Can they be converted during restructuring? I thought about Gary Pittman and his careful language about simplifying joint holdings. I thought about the tulips still on my windowsill, yellow and perfect, and already beginning to drop their petals. Everything connected. Every piece I had been collecting for 6 months connected to this one wire transfer on January 3rd. I opened the notebook. February 2025. Wire transfer. January 3rd, $250,000 joint account to Meridian Crestview, LLC. LLC registered November 2024, Camelback Road, her building. Condo deposit, Scottsdale Fashion Square, $1.95 million, contract January 6th. I paused, then wrote, "He is buying her a home with our money. He needs my signature to cover what's left." Now I understand everything. I closed the notebook. Outside the kitchen window, the February sky was pale and clear. A perfect Arizona winter morning, the kind of day that looked simple from the inside. Nothing about this was simple anymore. Gerald was already standing when I walked in. Not the polite standing of a first meeting, something more deliberate. A folder sat open on his desk, a single signed page on top turned to face the chair across from him. He had been expecting me. "Sit down," he said. "I finished my review." I sat. He remained standing, which I had learned meant what he was about to say mattered. 3 weeks of analysis," he said. "Every document you brought me cross-referenced against the trust your father had me draft in 1993. He opened the folder. "I want to go through each condition before I tell you what I've decided." He laid the documents out one by one as he spoke. Financial misuse, the spreadsheet, the $379,800 breakdown, the wire transfer to Meridian Crestview, LLC, the condo deposit. Documented infidelity, Linda's doorbell cam footage, the boutique manager's signed statement. Coerced signing, the gaslighting entries, Gary Pittman's restructuring pitch, the sequence of tulips followed immediately by paperwork. Each piece landed on the desk like a card being played. When he finished, he looked up. "All 3 conditions are satisfied, unambiguously." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means I'm activating the audit clause. I'll file the formal trustee notice with the institution today. The account restrictions will be in place within 3 to 5 business days." He turned the signed page toward me. "As independent trustee, I am initiating a formal audit of all trust assets. I am freezing any transactions involving those assets pending review, and I am restoring full managerial authority to you as primary beneficiary." I stared at the page. "He can't move the money. He cannot move it, restructure it, or borrow against it without your written approval." Gerald held my gaze. "Any document he presents to you from this point forward is legally meaningless without your signature." The office was completely quiet. "Can he challenge your appointment?" I asked. "No. Your father made the trustee designation irrevocable without beneficiary consent, specifically to prevent that." A pause. He thought of everything. I looked at the signed page on the desk for a long moment. "He told me once," Gerald said, quieter now, "that he didn't know what your future held, but he wanted to make sure that whatever it held, you wouldn't be facing it alone." I picked up the pen, signed my name, slowly. Primary beneficiary acknowledging audit activation. I set the pen down and looked at what I had just done. 31 years ago, my father had sat in an office not unlike this one and built something I didn't think I'd ever need. A structure, a mechanism, a locked door with a key he had kept safe until I was ready to use it. I was ready. "What's next?" I asked. Gerald closed the folder. "Now," he said simply, "we wait for him to make his next move, and we let him make it." I was putting the signed page back into my bag when Gerald said, "There's one more thing." His tone had changed. Still calm, Gerald was always calm, but something underneath it was different, more careful. He sat down, which he hadn't done the entire meeting. He opened a second folder, smaller than the first, and placed it on the desk without turning it toward me yet. "During my review," he said, "I came across something that doesn't affect the trust activation, but you need to know about it." I set my bag down. "Tell me." "Gary Pittman." He looked at me directly. "Your CPA." I was very still. "What about him?" 4 months before he called you in for that December meeting, the one where he pushed the restructuring, he was retained by your husband. Privately, not as a joint accountant, as a personal consultant. Gerald opened the folder and turned it toward me. He was briefed on the full trust structure, your premarital assets, the account numbers, the approximate valuations, all of it. I looked at the page in front of me. He knew, I said, not a question. He knew everything, and he was hired specifically to do two things. Gerald tapped the page, first to make the restructuring proposal sound like routine tax advice, and second to provide Richard's attorney with a professional assessment that you had been informed of and consented to the account changes. The room was very quiet. The December meeting, I said slowly. He called that meeting himself. Yes. And the two cancellations before that when I tried to meet him privately. He was told not to meet with you alone until Richard's attorney had prepared the restructuring documents. Gerald's voice was even no editorializing, just facts. He followed those instructions. I sat back in my chair. I thought about Gary's office, the bowl of mints, 11 years of annual meetings, the same questions, the same forms, his pen clicking and then stopping when I asked how he knew about my premarital account. I think you mentioned it last year. He had known because Richard told him. He had been managing me carefully, professionally, with 11 years of built trust as his tool from the moment Richard needed him to. Is he liable? I asked. That depends on how far you want to take it. Gerald closed the folder. For now, it means his restructuring recommendation carries zero weight as independent advice, and it means any document he prepared as part of that process is compromised. I nodded slowly. I remember the two cancellations, I said quietly. I thought he was busy. I know. I almost called a third time. But you didn't, Gerald said. You stopped. You wrote it down. And you came here instead. He looked at me steadily. That's the difference. I picked up my bag. Outside Gerald's window, Phoenix was sharp and bright, the same city it had been an hour ago. Everything looked exactly the same. Nothing was. I heard it on a Thursday evening, 3 days after the meeting with Gerald. I hadn't been listening. That was the thing, I hadn't been trying to hear anything. I was walking down the hallway toward the kitchen when Richard's study door stopped me. Not closed all the way. An inch of light along the frame, and his voice coming through low and quick the way he spoke when he thought the house was empty. I had come home early, he didn't know. I stood in the hallway and didn't move. Her voice came through the phone speaker clear enough to catch every word. You promised me Richard. You said before Christmas. The condo closes, we file, we're done waiting. A pause. It's March. We're not even close. I'm handling it. His voice was controlled but tight. These things take time. I've been patient for 2 years. Her voice cracked slightly at the edges, not performance, actual strain. I have everything, Richard. Everything. You understand what I'm saying. If this doesn't move forward by end of year, I won't. Lower your voice. I'm on the phone. There's no one. I said lower it. A pause, then quieter, almost gentle. Listen to me. Everything is being handled. The restructuring is almost ready. Once she signs, the condo closes, everything moves. Just give me until December. You've been saying December for a year. This December is different. I have a signing date. Silence on her end. Then if she doesn't sign, she'll sign. Certain. Flat. The voice of a man who had never once considered that I wouldn't. She always does. I stood in the hallway for 10 full seconds. Then I walked quietly to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and opened the notebook. March 2025. Overheard phone call study door ajar. Her voice through speaker. Deadline condo close plus legal filing before December 31st. Threat, she has documentation, will use it if he doesn't deliver. His response, she'll sign. She always does. Signing date referenced, not specified. I set the pen down. I thought about her voice, the crack at the edges, the 2 years of waiting the threat that wasn't entirely cold, because underneath it was someone who actually believed she was going to get what she'd been promised. She was desperate. He was cornered. 2 people running toward a deadline that no longer existed because the account they were counting on had been locked 3 days ago by a trustee whose name neither of them knew. They were moving fast, rushing, certain. And certainty, I had learned, was the one thing that made people stop reading the fine print. I closed the notebook and looked out the kitchen window at the quiet Arizona evening. She'll sign. She always does. He had said that about me for 30 years, and for 30 years he had been right. Not anymore. He came home early on a Tuesday in April. That alone told me something. Richard didn't come home early without a reason. He had a folder under his arm, dark blue, the kind his office used for client presentations. He set it on the coffee table in front of me with the casual ease of a man delivering something unimportant, then sat down in the armchair across from me and crossed one leg over the other. "Gary put this together," he said. "Year-end tax restructuring. Routine stuff, just simplifying how some of the accounts are categorized. Makes everything cleaner going forward." I looked at the folder, then at him. "Can I see it?" "Of course." He gestured toward it. "Open available, nothing to hide." I picked it up and opened to the first page. The main document was 21 pages dense, professional formatted the way things are formatted when someone wants them to look thorough and feel overwhelming. Account summaries, tax category adjustments, projected savings figures in bold. The kind of document designed to make a person feel that reading it carefully would take more effort than simply trusting the person who prepared it. I turned pages slowly. Richard watched me with the patience of a man who expected this to take 3 minutes. Page 19. A smaller section. Different font size, not dramatically smaller, just enough that you'd miss it if you were skimming. Addendum C. Beneficial interest restructuring. 2 paragraphs. 1 signature line. I read it twice. The addendum transferred management authority over my premarital assets into a new LLC structure, with Richard listed as sole director. The language was careful. I remained the named beneficiary. My interest wasn't eliminated, just managed by him, through a company he controlled entirely. On paper, I still owned everything. In practice, I would own nothing I could touch without his approval. I turned back to the front page, read the title again. Routine Tax Optimization Household Accounts. Routine. "Take your time," Richard said pleasantly. I closed the folder and looked at him. "Can I keep this for a few days? I want to read it properly." A flicker. Small, almost nothing. "It's pretty straightforward. Gary can walk you through it if—" "I know," I smiled. "You know how I am. I just like to read things myself before I sign. Old habit from helping Dad with his books." He held my gaze for a moment, then he smiled back, easy, unbothered, completely controlled. "Of course, take your time." He went to change out of his suit. I sat with the folder on my lap and looked at the wall across from me. Routine. He had used that word twice. In my experience, the word routine appeared most often in sentences designed to discourage questions, and routine documents never needed a hidden addendum in small print on page 19. I went to the kitchen, opened the 3rd drawer, and placed the folder next to the notebook. Then I called Gerald. Gerald had read the entire folder before I arrived. I could tell by the way it sat on his desk, not stacked neatly the way he kept documents he hadn't touched, but slightly splayed certain pages, tabbed with small yellow markers. He had gone through it carefully. He always did. I sat down. He didn't waste time. "Addendum C," he said, opening directly to page 19. "Tell me what you understood when you read it." "That I'd remain the named beneficiary," I said. "But management authority transfers to an LLC with Richard as sole director. I'd still own it on paper, but every decision goes through him." Gerald nodded slowly. "That's exactly right. And do you understand what that means in practice?" "I think so, but tell me anyway." He leaned forward. "Right now, as primary beneficiary with restored managerial authority, you can instruct me as trustee to take any action regarding trust assets. Sell, hold, transfer, restrict your decision, your signature, your control." He tapped page 19. "If you had signed this addendum before we activated the audit clause, that authority would have moved into the LLC. Legally, you'd still be the beneficiary, but functionally, Richard would control every transaction. And if I ever tried to dispute it, his attorney would produce this document with your signature on it." Gerald looked at me steadily. "Voluntary consent, fully executed, dated and witnessed." A pause. "You would have signed away your own protection without knowing that's what you were doing." The office was quiet for a moment. "He designed it so I'd still have my name on everything," I said. "Yes. So if I ever complained, tried to claim I had no access, he could show a judge that I was the named beneficiary the entire time." "Correct. And given the gaslighting documentation, the memory comments, the public remarks, his attorney could argue that any confusion on your part was consistent with a pre-existing pattern of cognitive difficulty." Gerald said it plainly, no softening. It was a well-constructed trap. I looked out his window at the Phoenix skyline, pale, bright, completely indifferent. "How close did I come?" I asked. "To signing it." "To not seeing it." Gerald considered that for a moment. "Most people wouldn't have caught it. The addendum language is deliberately embedded, formatted to blend. He looked at me. You caught it because you read slowly and you understand how numbers and structures connect, the same reason your father trusted you with his ledgers. I was quiet for a moment. What do I tell Richard? I asked. Tell him you're still reviewing, that you have questions about the tax implications and want to understand it fully before you commit. Gerald almost smiled. Let him think patience is the only thing slowing you down. I picked up my bag. He thinks he's the only one who planned ahead, I said. Yes, Gerald said. That's his most significant miscalculation. Gerald had given me a list, not suggestions, a list. Typed itemized each entry with a checkbox beside it. The kind of document a careful man produces when he wants to leave nothing to interpretation. I spent the next 6 months working through it. May. I drove back to the Old Town boutique with a formal letter from Gerald's office requesting a sworn statement from the manager. She read it carefully, asked 2 questions, and signed in front of a notary Gerald had arranged. Her statement documented the transaction, the instructions she'd received, and the exact words his wife will understand she always does. Signed, witnessed, dated. Filed in binder 1. June. Linda came over for coffee and left with a formal request for her doorbell cam footage. Not a phone copy this time, but a certified digital file with verified timestamps transferred through a chain of custody Gerald's office had specified. Linda didn't ask questions. She just said, "It's about time." Filed in binder 1 alongside the boutique statement. July. Gerald's office subpoenaed Gary Pittman's professional correspondence through a formal discovery process I didn't fully understand but trusted completely. What came back confirmed everything: the emails between Gary and Richard's personal attorney, the briefing documents, the agreed talking points for the December restructuring meeting, a professional hired to perform as neutral while working against me, filed in binder 2. August. My doctor's office. I sat across from my physician of 14 years and explained without embarrassment what Richard had been saying publicly about my memory. She pulled my full medication history, the blood pressure prescription, the low-dose sleep aid, both at their minimum therapeutic levels, for over 6 years. She wrote a formal letter on clinic letterhead. Neither medication at prescribed doses affected cognitive function by any established medical standard. Filed in binder 2. September. 12 months of bank statements printed and organized chronologically. Every transaction flagged, every transfer annotated, every LLC cross-referenced. Filed in binder 3 with the original spreadsheet I had built in November. October. Gerald reviewed all 3 binders personally, made 4 minor corrections, added 2 additional supporting documents from his own trust records. Then he called me into his office, set the binders on the desk, and looked at me across 31 years of preparation. This, he said, is sufficient. I looked at the 3 binders. Months of early mornings, careful handwriting, quiet drives to notary offices and doctors' rooms and law offices. Every entry my father had taught me to make, source dated, verified. 3 copies of each, I confirmed. Already done. Gerald slid a paper toward me, a checklist, every box checked. 1 set here, 1 in a safety deposit box under your name only, 1 with me as trustee. I picked up the checklist and looked at every checked box. My father used to say numbers don't lie, people do. I had enough numbers now. The only thing left was the right moment to put them on the right table. He called on a Tuesday night in October. I was on the back porch when my phone lit up with his name. The Arizona sky was doing the thing it does in fall, deep blue at the top, fading to amber at the horizon, the kind of gradient that looks painted. I picked up on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart." Silence. Then, "Mom, I need to tell you something." I recognized that voice immediately. Not the words, the weight behind them. The same weight from the December call, but heavier now, more certain. "Tell me," I said. "I've been doing some digging." A pause. "I know about Meridian Crestview. I traced the LLC registration. I found the condo listing, the Fashion Square Tower, the contract date, the deposit amount." Another pause. "Mom, that's our money." "I know." "You know, not angry, something past anger, the flat exhaustion of someone who had been holding a feeling for a long time." "How long?" "Since February." "February," he exhaled slowly. "Mom, it's October." "I know what month it is, Daniel." "You've known for 7 months, and you haven't—" He stopped himself. I could hear him choosing his next words carefully, the way he always did when he was upset with me, but didn't want it to come out wrong. "What are you waiting for?" "The right moment." "Which is when?" I looked out at the amber horizon. The binders were in Gerald's office, 3 copies each, every box checked. December 28th was 14 weeks away. December 28th, I said. Silence on his end. The Desert Summit, he said slowly. Dad's partner event. Yes. I could hear him thinking. That's his biggest night of the year. Every banking partner he has will be in that room. Yes. Another silence, longer this time. What do you need from me? He asked, quietly. No more argument, just the question. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I had been carrying so long I had stopped noticing the weight of it. I need you to be there, I said. That's all. Just be in that room. And do what? Stand next to me. He was quiet for a moment. That's it. That's everything, I said. Can you do that? Mom. His voice was steady now, his grandfather's steadiness, the kind that didn't waver. I'll be there. Whatever you need, whatever happens, I'll be right there. I closed my eyes for just a second. Thank you, Daniel. Don't thank me yet. A pause and then quietly. Are you okay right now tonight? I looked at the painted sky above my porch, thought about the 3 binders, the signed trustee documents, the notebook nearly full now, every entry dated and sourced. Yes, I said, and meant it completely for the first time in a very long time. I'm okay. 3 months passed quietly on the outside, October, November, December. Richard asked twice about the restructuring documents. I told him I was still reviewing with my own counsel. He nodded, both times patient certain, the way a man is patient, when he believes the outcome is already decided. He was still holding the pen. He just didn't know I had already put something else on the table. The tulips on the windowsill had long since died and been replaced with nothing. Gary Pittman's office stopped sending correspondence after Gerald's discovery process. The 3rd drawer in the kitchen was so full I had started a second folder. 16 days before Christmas, the doorbell rang at 9:15 in the morning. I was in the kitchen in my usual Saturday clothes jeans, the gray cardigan, the blue and white apron I'd had for 12 years. I wasn't expecting anyone. The man at the door was completely unremarkable. Mid-50s, medium height, a pale blue button-down shirt slightly creased from the drive, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of face you'd pass in a grocery store and not remember 10 minutes later. He was holding a thick envelope and a clipboard. Mrs. Calloway, he said pleasantly. Yes. Delivery for you. I'll need a signature. He held out the clipboard. I signed on the indicated line, my name, the date, the time. He tore off the yellow copy, handed me the envelope, and smiled the mild professional smile of a man who delivered things for a living. Thank you, ma'am. Have a good morning. He turned and walked back to a gray sedan parked at the curb. Not a delivery truck, just a car. He pulled away without hurrying. Later, I would understand why he had come himself, rather than sending a courier, when the document required a verified signature from the named beneficiary, some things you did in person. I stood at the open door for a moment, watching the sedan disappear around the corner. Then I looked down at the envelope in my hands. Heavy, legal-sized. No return address, just my name and home address printed cleanly, and a small embossed seal in the upper left corner I didn't immediately recognize. I closed the front door and carried the envelope to the kitchen table. Sat down, set it flat in front of me. Something about the weight of it, the deliberate thickness, the embossed seal. The fact that it had required a signature from a man who drove a plain gray sedan and wore a pale blue shirt and had the most forgettable face I had ever seen told me this was not routine correspondence. I opened it carefully the way my father had taught me to open anything important, slowly, without tearing. Inside a document, 23 pages, professionally bound, a cover sheet with a title in clean, bold type. Proposed Trust Restructuring and Asset Management Transfer. Final execution draft. I set the cover sheet down, picked up my phone, called Gerald. He answered on the second ring. It arrived, I said. A brief pause, then, I'll clear my afternoon. Come in at 2. I looked at the 23 pages on my kitchen table. 16 days before Christmas. 16 days before December 28th. They were right on schedule. So was I. Gerald was already at his desk when I arrived. The folder I'd brought was unnecessary. He had printed his own copy of the document from the digital version his office had received simultaneously. 2 copies of the same 23 pages side by side on his desk, both already tabbed with yellow markers. I sat down. He didn't waste time. Pages 19 through 21, he said, opening directly to the tabbed section. Addendum C, compare it to the April version. He placed both documents side by side, the April draft Richard had brought home with the tulips and this final execution version. I read both addendums slowly, line by line. The language had been polished. Certain phrases smoothed out, technical terms replaced with simpler ones, the formatting adjusted to look less buried. But the structure was identical. The outcome was identical. Management authority transferred to Richard's LLC. My name on the beneficiary line. His hand on every lever. It's the same trap, I said. Dressed differently. Gerald closed both folders. And this time it comes with a deadline. Bottom of page 23. I turned to the last page. A signature line, my name pre-printed beneath it, and below that, in smaller text, execution required by December 31st, 2025 for current tax year applicability. 19 days, I said. And he intends to present it to you at the Desert Summit on the 28th. Gerald looked at me steadily. In front of his banking partners, where the social pressure to appear cooperative would be at its highest. I looked at the signature line with my name on it. He's going to hand me a pen in front of Thomas Brennan and 2 other senior partners, I said. And he's going to expect me to sign because refusing would look like instability, like exactly the kind of memory and judgment problem he's been describing to people for a year. Yes, Gerald said. That's the mechanism. And if I sign? The trust restructures. The LLC takes management control. The condo closes within 30 days. And by January 15th, everything he's built for the past 18 months is legally protected behind a document bearing your voluntary signature. The office was very quiet. But I'm not going to sign, I said. No, Gerald agreed. You're not. So what do I bring instead? He reached under his desk and lifted a flat document case onto the table, set it between us, and opened it. Inside 3 sets of documents, each bound separately. The binders condensed, organized the essential evidence distilled into something a room full of bankers could read in 10 minutes. You bring the truth, Gerald said simply, and you let them decide what to do with it. I looked at the document case for a long moment. 16 days, a room full of people whose respect Richard had spent 30 years earning. A pen he would offer me in front of all of them. And I would finally have something to put on the table instead. Gerald, I said quietly. Was my father ever wrong about anything? He considered that for a moment. Not about the things that mattered, he said. I picked up my copy of the 23 pages and stood up. 16 days. The holiday cocktail party was at a hotel in North Scottsdale. The kind of venue that existed specifically to make people feel successful. High ceilings, chandelier lighting, waitstaff moving through the crowd with practiced invisibility. Richard had mentioned it 3 days earlier as an obligation, not an invitation. I had said I would come. He hadn't argued. I wore the navy dress. He wore the charcoal suit. We arrived together, which by now meant nothing at all. The room was full of the usual faces, developers, architects, the bankers whose signatures moved projects from proposals to buildings. I recognized most of them. They recognized me as Richard's wife, which in this room meant they smiled warmly and moved on quickly. I was refilling my water glass at the bar when she walked in. Red dress, dark hair. The easy confidence of someone who had decided tonight was important and had dressed accordingly. I had seen her twice before through a doorbell cam and across a patio at a cocktail party where she hadn't known who I was. She knew who I was tonight. I could tell by the way her eyes found me first, before they found Richard. Richard crossed the room toward her with the practiced casualness of a man who had rehearsed this moment. He brought her into a small group near the windows and made introductions smoothly. This is the design consultant I mentioned. She's been working on the interiors for the Paradise Valley project. Handshakes, smiles, the ordinary choreography of professional socializing. She worked the group well, charming and formed, asking the right questions. I watched from across the room and thought, she's good at this. She had prepared. Then she crossed toward me. Margaret, isn't it? Warm smile, extended hand. Richard's told me so much about you. Has he? I shook her hand. I don't think we've been formally introduced. We haven't. Her grip was firm. She held it a beat longer than necessary. Then she leaned in slightly, just enough, and dropped her voice below the ambient noise of the room. Sign the papers early, she said. Quietly, pleasantly. The smile never moved. Before the 28th, it's easier for everyone that way. I looked at her. She held my gaze steady, certain the look of someone delivering a message they've been waiting to deliver. I said nothing for a moment. Then I smiled, the same warm, unhurried smile I had been perfecting for 30 years in rooms exactly like this one. Excuse me? I said pleasantly. "I want to say hello to Thomas Brennan before the evening gets away from me." I turned and walked across the room toward the senior banking partner, whose signature Richard needed more than any other in that building. Behind me, I heard nothing. No response, no footsteps following. I didn't look back. She thought signing early meant peace. She thought I was still the woman who said yes quietly and quickly and without argument. I had signed something, just not what she was asking for. 8 days ago, I had signed Gerald Holt's activation documents and put 3 binders of evidence into a document case that was currently sitting in a safety deposit box under my name only. 8 days, 8 more to go. Before I take you into that room in Paradise Valley the night she finally puts everything on the table, drop "ready" in the comments so I know you're still with me. 16 months of silence, 3 binders of evidence, 1 room full of every person who mattered most to him. What happens next she spent over a year preparing for. A small note. What follows includes some fictional elements woven in to make the story more meaningful. If you'd rather step away, this is the moment. But if you stay, I promise it's worth it. The estate in Paradise Valley was exactly as I remembered it. Torchlights lining the driveway, the soft click of dress shoes on flagstone. 40, maybe 50 people moving through the warm December evening. Bankers, developers, project directors. The people whose handshakes moved money from one column to another. The Arizona night was 65 degrees and perfectly clear. The kind of winter evening that reminded you why people came here and never left. Richard had driven us together. He was in the charcoal suit again, his best one, the one he wore when the room mattered. He had been relaxed all day, confident in the specific way of a man who believed he had already won. I was in the black dress I had bought in October. Simple, understated. The document case Gerald had prepared was in my bag, condensed, organized, 3 sets, each labeled. I had been carrying it for 16 days. We moved through the room the way we always move through rooms like this. Richard working the crowd in wide circles, me at the edges, the familiar choreography of 30 years. Except tonight I was watching the room differently, tracking positions. Thomas Brennan near the bar with 2 colleagues, the event coordinator by the door, the catering staff moving predictably along the outer wall, and Daniel standing near the garden entrance in a dark jacket, a glass of water in his hand, his eyes finding mine the moment I walked in. I gave him the smallest nod. He returned it. At 8:15, Richard materialized at my elbow. "Come meet someone," he said pleasantly. He steered me toward a cluster near the outdoor table, Thomas Brennan and 2 other senior partners I recognized from last year's event. The conversation moved easily for several minutes. Project updates, market projections, the Paradise Valley development timeline. Richard was smooth and formed, completely in his element. Then he reached into his jacket and produced the folder. Dark blue, 23 pages, my name pre-printed on the signature line of page 23. "Actually," he said in the warm, casual tone of a man raising something minor, "while I have everyone here, Margaret, if you wouldn't mind, this is the restructuring document we discussed. Just your signature, and we can finalize everything before year-end." He held out a pen. Routine stuff. 3 pairs of banking eyes turned toward me pleasantly. The pen hovered between us. I looked at it for one long moment. Then I reached into my bag. I placed the document case on the table and opened it. Removed 3 sets of bound documents. 1 in front of Thomas Brennan, 1 in front of each partner. "Before anyone signs anything," I said, my voice completely even, "I'd like you to look at this." Richard's hand, the one holding the pen, went very still. "This is a 12-month bank statement summary." I turned to the first tabbed page. "This is a sworn statement from a boutique manager in Old Town Scottsdale. This is the trust activation document signed by our independent trustee on March 10th of this year, confirming that the restructuring document Richard just presented to me has no legal standing without prior trustee approval, which was not obtained." The table was completely silent. "Margaret." Richard's voice was low, controlled, but something underneath it had shifted. "This isn't the place." "You chose the place," I said quietly. "Not me." From across the patio, Daniel stepped forward out of the crowd and came to stand beside me. He didn't say anything immediately. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, his grandfather's posture, his grandfather's steadiness. Then he looked at his father. "Dad," his voice was calm, absolute. "You can't ask us to stay silent about this. Not anymore." Richard looked at his son, then at the 3 bankers who were reading the first pages of the document I had placed in front of them, then at me. For the first time in 30 years of marriage, I watched my husband's face go completely still. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing a room, but the stillness of a man who had run out of moves and knew it. He had no answer. Not for the documents. Not for Daniel. Not for me. I had waited 16 months for this moment. It was quieter than I expected, and more complete. The table stayed quiet for nearly a full minute. Thomas Brennan was on the second page of the bound document. The partner to his left had turned to the bank statement summary. The third was reading the trustee activation letter, his finger tracing the signature line at the bottom where Gerald Holt's name sat in clean, unhurried cursive. Richard hadn't moved. He was still holding the pen. "This is a private family matter," he said finally. His voice had recovered some of its steadiness. "These are internal documents that have been taken out of context. I think what we should do is step away from the evening and discuss this separately." "Richard." The voice came from behind him. Everyone turned. The man who stepped forward from the edge of the patio wore a pale blue shirt and wire-rimmed glasses. I recognized him before anyone else in that room did. I had signed his clipboard 16 days ago on my front doorstep. I recognized him immediately. Thomas Brennan recognized him too. I could see it in the way his posture shifted, the almost imperceptible straightening that happened when someone of consequence entered a conversation. "David," Brennan said carefully, "I didn't know you were here tonight. I was asked to attend." The man David stepped to the edge of the table and looked at the documents spread across it without touching them. Then he looked at Richard. "My name is David Carver. I'm the compliance officer for the Western Region Trust accounts at your institution, Mr. Calloway." Richard stared at him. "I don't know who—" "You received my office's letter in October," David said pleasantly, "regarding a pattern review on trust account transactions. You declined the meeting." He paused. "That's your right, but the review continued regardless." He reached into his jacket and produced a single folded page, placed it on the table beside my documents. "The restructuring document you presented tonight has been flagged under our internal compliance review as containing a deceptive attachment, specifically an addendum that materially alters the beneficiary's rights without adequate disclosure in the primary document." He looked at Brennan. "Under our institution's fiduciary protocols, we are not able to process any transaction originating from this document until the attachment concern is resolved through a formal review process." Brennan looked at this folded page, then at Richard. Richard's jaw tightened. "This is a family matter. Whatever internal review—" "It stopped being a family matter," David said quietly, "when the transactions involved a trust account held at our institution. At that point it became our matter as well." He looked at Richard without hostility, simply clearly the way a man states a fact he has stated many times before. "I'm sorry, Mr. Calloway." The patio was absolutely silent. I looked at David Carver, the pale blue shirt, the wire-rimmed glasses, the forgettable face I had signed a clipboard for 16 days ago on my front doorstep. He had been there from the beginning, doing his job, quietly, methodically, the way careful people always worked. The most ordinary man at the party, the most important one in the room. The crowd had shifted. The easy, warm atmosphere of the evening had not collapsed dramatically. It had simply changed temperature the way a room does when something significant happens and everyone pretends not to have noticed while noticing everything. Small clusters of people had drifted to the edges of the patio. Conversations had restarted quieter, more careful. Richard was still at the table. Thomas Brennan had stepped away to make a phone call. David Carver was speaking in low tones with the third banking partner. Daniel was beside me close, but not crowding the way he had been all evening. I saw her near the garden entrance. She was moving toward the side gate. Not running, but walking with the particular speed of someone who had decided the evening was over and didn't want to be seen leaving. The red dress that had looked so deliberate 2 hours ago looked different now. She had her bag pulled tight against her side. I touched Daniel's arm. "Give me 1 minute." He looked at me, nodded once. I crossed the patio and reached the garden entrance just as she did. She saw me coming, stopped. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Just 2 women standing in the torchlight while the party continued behind us, the soft sound of other people's conversations drifting through the warm night air. Her eyes were bright. Not tears yet, but close. The careful composure she had maintained all evening was thinning at the edges. "I'm not going to make a scene," I said quietly. "That's not why I came over." She looked at me warily, waiting. "I just want to say one thing." I held her gaze, not unkindly. "You wanted him because you thought you knew who he was, what he was worth, what he was capable of." I paused. "You didn't know everything. You still don't. She swallowed. Her jaw tightened slightly. I'm not saying it to hurt you, I said. I'm saying it because someone said it to me once and I wish I had listened. I looked at her for a moment longer. I hope the next chapter is better for you. I mean that. She didn't answer. Her eyes dropped first. She turned and walked through the garden gate without looking back quickly, quietly, the red dress disappearing into the shadows of the driveway beyond. I stood at the entrance for a moment. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt something closer to the particular exhaustion that comes after a long illness, finally breaks the relief of it, and the tiredness underneath the relief, and the faint, complicated pity for everyone involved, including yourself. She had wanted something real. She had just chosen a path that couldn't get her there. That wasn't nothing. It was just not my problem anymore. I turned back towards the patio. Daniel was where I had left him. Gerald had arrived quietly, as Gerald always arrived, and was standing beside my son with the document case closed and secured. I walked back toward the two men I trusted most in the world. The evening wasn't over, but the hardest part was. Task 5.7. Gerald left first. He shook my hand at the edge of the patio, once firmly the same handshake as the first day I walked into his office with a notebook and a USB drive, and 30 years of silence finally ready to end. He said nothing beyond, "Call me Monday." Then he picked up the document case and walked to his car with the unhurried certainty of a man who had done exactly what he came to do. The party was winding down around us, people drifting toward the valet stand, voices dropping to the comfortable murmur of a long evening reaching its natural end. Richard was somewhere inside, I didn't know where, and for the first time in 30 years I didn't need to. Daniel found a quiet corner of the garden near the far wall, away from the remaining guests. 2 chairs, a small table, a torch burning low nearby. He sat down and looked at me until I sat down too. For a moment neither of us said anything. The Arizona night was warm and still. Above the garden wall, the sky was full of stars in the way it only gets in winter, sharp, clear, more of them than you remember existing. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked. I thought about the question, really thought about it the way I hadn't let myself think about much of anything for 16 months. "Yes," I said, "for the first time in a long time, yes." He nodded slowly, looked at his hands for a moment. Then, "Why didn't you tell me sooner, when it started?" "Because I needed to do it alone first," I said, "to find out if I could." "And?" I looked at him. "I could?" He was quiet for a moment. "You could have let me help earlier. I wanted to." "I know you did." I reached over and put my hand briefly over his. But this wasn't about having help. It was about knowing, really knowing, that I didn't need to be rescued, that I could stand up on my own and it would be enough. I paused. "Does that make sense?" He looked at me for a long moment, his grandfather's eyes steady clear, taking things in without rushing to respond. "It makes sense," he said finally. "I don't love that you went through it alone, but it makes sense." "I wasn't completely alone," I said. "I had your grandfather." Daniel looked at me uncertain. "His notebook," I said, "his attorney, his 31 years of preparation." I looked up at the stars. "He built everything I needed. I just had to be ready to use it." My son sat with that for a moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked up at the same sky. "He would have liked tonight," Daniel said quietly. "Yes," I said, "he would have." We sat there for a while longer, not talking, not needing to. The torch burned low beside us. The last of the guests moved toward the entrance. The December night settled around us, warm and quiet and completely still. My son was beside me. After everything, the notebook, the binders, the 16 months, the table in front of Thomas Brennan, the woman in the red dress walking through the garden gate, this was what remained. This was enough. This was everything. The first week of January moved quietly. I knew what was happening. Gerald kept me informed through brief factual calls, the way he communicated everything. No editorializing, just the sequence of events as they occurred, laid out in the same clean order as the documents in the binders. The joint credit accounts were frozen on January 2nd. Standard procedure once the trust audit was formally initiated, and the compliance flag from David Carver's office had been filed. Richard discovered this when his card was declined at a restaurant lunch with a project contact. Gerald told me this without expression. I received it the same way. The condo transaction collapsed on January 6th. The bank declined to process the closing. The LLC structure had been flagged. The deposit funds were under review as part of the trust audit, and without clear title to the originating account, the transaction couldn't proceed. The $250,000 deposit was frozen pending investigation. The seller relisted within the week. I thought about her when I heard that. The deadline she had pressed him toward. End of year, she had said. Before Christmas. I pictured the phone call she must have made when the closing fell through, and felt again that complicated pity that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't indifference either. Meridian Interior Solutions and Meridian Crestview, LLC, both received formal inquiries from the State Business Registry and the bank's compliance department simultaneously. Both companies had the same registered agent, the same Camelback Road address, and a combined transaction history that would require substantial documentation to explain. Neither company had that documentation. Richard retained a private attorney on January 8th. Gerald mentioned it in passing the way you mention weather. He's engaged outside counsel. That's expected. It doesn't change anything on our end. The Desert Summit Project, the development deal that had been the centerpiece of Richard's professional calendar for 2 years, was placed on indefinite hold by the banking partners on January 14th. Thomas Brennan's office sent a formal letter citing pending due diligence requirements related to trust account irregularities. 3 other investors quietly withdrew their letters of intent within the same week. I read Gerald's summary of these events at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in mid-January. Coffee beside me, the third drawer closed beside me, the notebook inside it nearly full. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly, more like the particular stillness that comes when something long in motion finally stops. He had spent 30 years building a reputation in rooms full of people whose respect he valued above everything else. He had built it carefully, methodically, brick by brick, the handshakes, the deals, the charcoal suit, the smooth confidence of a man who believed his position was unassailable. He had built it on a foundation he thought was entirely his. He had been wrong about that since 1993. I closed Gerald's summary, put it in the folder, and placed it in the drawer. Then I made a second cup of coffee and sat in the quiet kitchen and let the January morning be exactly what it was. Task 6.2. Gerald called on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-January. Richard's attorney has filed a preliminary motion, he said. They're arguing diminished capacity, claiming that your cognitive state at the time of the trust activation may have been affected by prescription medication. I sat down at the kitchen table. Which medications? I asked, though I already knew. Blood pressure, sleep aid, both listed in your medical records which they obtained through the discovery process. A pause. They're arguing that the combination over extended use could have impaired your judgment when you met with me in March. I was quiet for a moment. Gerald, I said, I've been on both of those medications for 6 years, at the lowest therapeutic dose available. I know. That's why I've already contacted your physician's office. His voice was completely even. Dr. Reeves has agreed to provide a formal written statement. I've scheduled you for a brief appointment Thursday at 10. She'll do a cognitive assessment and document her findings. Dr. Patricia Reeves had been my physician for 14 years. She was 61, direct, the kind of doctor who gave you information without wrapping it in unnecessary softness. When I sat across from her Thursday morning and explained what Richard's attorney had filed, she looked at me for a long moment over the top of her reading glasses. They're claiming your blood pressure medication and your sleep aid impaired your cognitive function, she said flatly. Yes. She pulled up my file on her screen, scrolled, didn't speak for a moment. Mrs. Calloway, you've been on lisinopril at 5 milligrams since 2019. That's the entry-level dose we typically don't even consider cognitive effects a factor at that level. She turned to face me directly. Your sleep aid is melatonin 3 milligrams, which is available over the counter at any pharmacy in the country. She paused. Whoever prepared that motion either didn't read your prescription history or hoped no one else would. Can you put that in writing? I asked. I already have it drafted. She slid a folder across the desk. Formal clinical letter, my signature clinic letterhead. It addresses both medications by name, cites the relevant pharmacological literature, and concludes unambiguously that neither substance at your prescribed doses affects cognitive function by any established medical standard. I opened the folder and read the letter. It was exactly what she had described. Clear, clinical, unambiguous. 2 paragraphs that dismantled 18 months of dinner party jokes and careful public suggestions in the language of someone who actually understood what she was talking about. I closed the folder. Thank you, Patricia, I said. She looked at me steadily. For what it's worth, in 14 years, you've never once struck me as someone with memory problems. She paused. Quite the opposite, actually. I carried the letter to Gerald's office that afternoon. He read it, set it down, and made a single note on his legal pad. Their attorney withdrew the motion this morning, he said without looking up. Before you even walked in. I looked at him. They already knew. They knew as soon as they pulled your actual prescription records. He set his pen down. The motion was a test, to see if you'd panic. I thought about the dinner party, the warm laughter, memory stuff. We're keeping an eye on it. He had been planting that seed for over a year, carefully, patiently, building a story he thought no one would question. He hadn't counted on Dr. Reeves having 14 years of files that said otherwise. Task 6.3. Gerald called on a Thursday evening at the end of January. I was in the garden when my phone rang the back porch, the same place I had stood in October when Gary Pittman canceled his second appointment, and I had first understood that pattern mattered more than individual incidents. It's about Gary Pittman, Gerald said. I sat down in the garden chair. Tell me. His professional liability insurer contacted our office this week. As part of the formal discovery process, we requested his complete correspondence file related to your household accounts going back 18 months. A pause. He produced it. All of it. And 42 emails between Gary and Richard's personal attorney. Beginning in August of last year, the same month Richard redirected the bank statements. Gerald's voice was measured no editorializing. He was retained as a private consultant, paid separately from his accounting fees. His specific brief was to assess your financial understanding, identify gaps in your knowledge of the trust structure, and design a restructuring proposal that would appear to be routine tax advice. I looked out at the garden. The desert sage was silver in the evening light. He was paid to study me, I said. Yes, and to report back on whether you were likely to question the addendum. A pause. His assessment in his own words. Gerald read from the file, subject demonstrates limited engagement with complex financial instruments, unlikely to identify embedded provisions in standard document format. Recommend proceeding. The garden was very quiet. Limited engagement with complex financial instruments. I thought about the spreadsheet I had built in November. The $379,800 breakdown sourced and annotated. The 12 months of bank statements flagged and cross-referenced. The addendum on page 19 that I had identified in under 3 minutes because my father had taught me to read documents the way other people read conversations, slowly, completely between the lines. What happens to him? I asked. He's submitted a full disclosure to his professional licensing board. His insurer has already begun settlement discussions with our office. Gerald paused. He'll likely lose his CPA certification, possibly face civil liability depending on how far you want to pursue it. I sat with that for a moment. I had sat across from Gary Pittman for 11 years. His bowl of mints, his clicking pen, the careful, warm professionalism of a man I had trusted with our most private financial information. He had taken everything I trusted him with and handed it to the person using it against me. I don't want to pursue it further, I said. The disclosure is enough. You're certain? Yes. I looked at the sage again. He made a choice. He's living with the consequences of it. That's all I wanted. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Your father would have said the same thing. I know, I said. He used to say that justice and revenge weren't the same thing, and that confusing them was the fastest way to become someone you didn't recognize. After I hung up, I stayed in the garden a while longer. 11 years, a bowl of mints, a pen that clicked when he was nervous. I hadn't wanted to destroy Gary Pittman. I had never wanted to destroy anyone. I had only ever wanted to stop being destroyed. I had never read the notebook all the way through. From the night I found it in August, I had opened to the inside cover, found Gerald's number, and turned immediately to the back pages to begin my own entries. The middle section, the asset lists the audit conditions I had read in pieces as I needed them. The final pages of my father's own handwriting, the ones after the legal details I had always skipped. There had been something more urgent. There always was. On a Tuesday evening in early February, with nothing urgent left, I finally read them. 4 pages, not legal notes, something else entirely. He wrote about Clara first. Not the short version he'd given me in his office 31 years ago, but the full story. How she had trusted Frank completely, because that was what love meant to her. How the erosion happened so slowly, she hadn't noticed until the morning she tried to access an account and found her name wasn't on it anymore. She didn't lose her house because she was foolish, he wrote. She lost it because no one told her she was allowed to pay attention. Then there was Diane, his cousin's wife. 22 years of deferring every financial decision. Nothing legally in her name when the marriage ended. Nothing to stand on. I watched two women I loved lose everything, he wrote. Not because their husbands were monsters, but because the system assumed they weren't paying attention. I decided my daughter would pay attention. I decided to give her something worth paying attention to. Then in the last paragraph, slightly larger handwriting, the pen pressed harder. If you're reading this and things have gone wrong, don't be ashamed that it happened. Be proud that you're still standing. I built this for a daughter who was always stronger than she knew. I just wanted to make sure the paperwork agreed. I sat with those words for a long time. 16 months. The notebook entries, the binders, the drive to Phoenix, the table in Paradise Valley. And underneath all of it, quiet, persistent, the thing I had never let myself say out loud, the question of whether I'd had the right to do any of it. Whether a woman who had spent 30 years keeping the peace was allowed to stop. My father had answered that question before I knew to ask it. He hadn't built the trust because he doubted me. He had built it because he believed I would know what to do when the moment came. He had been right. I closed the notebook, set it on the nightstand. In the dark, I felt for the first time in a very long time something that wasn't exhaustion or relief, or the complicated weight of everything that had happened. Just quiet, just the particular stillness of a person who has finally put down something they were never supposed to carry alone. Gerald's office looked the same as always. The brick building, the slow elevator, the hallway with the slightly crooked photograph. Some things stayed exactly the same regardless of what changed around them. I had come to find that steadying rather than frustrating. I sat down across from him on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-February. He had a single folder on the desk, thinner than usual. "I want to go over your options," he said, "before we proceed to the next stage." "All right." He opened the folder. "The evidence we've compiled, the financial misuse documentation, the LLC structure, the CPA correspondence is sufficient to support a criminal referral for financial fraud. Wire fraud specifically given the interstate banking elements." He looked at me steadily. "That's one path. It would be lengthy, publicly visible, and the outcome would be outside your control once it's initiated. What's the other path?" "Divorce proceedings with the trust audit as the primary asset protection mechanism. The prenuptial agreement is fully intact. The trust assets were never successfully restructured. You retain everything your father put in your name, plus your share of the marital estate, as determined by Arizona community property law." He paused. "Clean, controlled, final." I looked at the folder. "If I pursue the criminal route," I said, "what happens to him?" "Potentially significant. Federal wire fraud carries serious exposure." Gerald kept his voice neutral. "But as I said once referred, it's no longer your case to manage." I sat with that for a moment. I thought about Richard at the Paradise Valley table, the pen in his hand going still, the controlled stillness of a man who had run out of moves. I thought about 30 years of carefully managed silences and dinner party laughter and tulips on the windowsill. I thought about what my father had written. "Don't be ashamed that it happened. Be proud that you're still standing." Standing was enough. I didn't need him on the ground. "I want to stop at the second option," I said. Gerald looked at me. "You're certain?" "Yes." I met his eyes. "I didn't do this to destroy him, Gerald. I did it to stop being destroyed." "Those aren't the same thing." I paused. "I know where the line is. I'm choosing to stop at it." He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once slowly, the nod of a man who respected a decision, even if he might have made a different one. "All right," he said. He picked up his pen. "Then we proceed with dissolution filing. I'll have the initial documents ready by end of week." I stood up and picked up my bag. At the door I stopped, turned back. "Gerald," I said, "thank you for all of it, for being what my father needed you to be." He looked at me over his reading glasses. "Your father knew what he was doing," he said simply. "He usually did." I took the slow elevator down, walked out into the February afternoon. The Phoenix sky was pale and wide and completely open. Some doors you walked through, some you simply closed behind you. I closed this one. I was up before dawn, not because I couldn't sleep. I had slept better in the past 2 months than I had in years. I was up because I wanted the house to be quiet when I did what I needed to do. Before Richard woke, before the day became complicated with his presence, I made coffee, stood at the counter, and drank it slowly in the dark kitchen, the way I had drunk 1,000 cups of coffee in this room over 30 years. The granite counter, the hood vent light, the window above the sink where the saguaro stood in the yard perfectly still in the February morning. The same kitchen, different morning. I set my cup down and went to the third drawer. I took out the notebook, opened it to the inside cover. My father's handwriting. Blue ink faded to the color of an old sky. "Don't sign anything when you're being pressured. Remember that, sweetheart." I had remembered. I carried the notebook to the counter and opened it on the photocopier Gerald had advised me to use for final documentation. Made one copy of the inside cover page, just that page, just those 2 lines, and the phone number below them. Folded the copy once neatly along the center. I placed it on the kitchen counter, not on the table. On the counter, the white quartz counter, the exact spot where he had thrown the Sedona invoice 18 months ago and told me to remember my place. I heard movement from the hallway, his footsteps 30 years of knowing exactly how they sounded. Slower this morning. He had been sleeping poorly for weeks. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw me standing there with my bag. He looked at the folded paper on the counter, then at me. "Margaret." "I'm not going to say much," I said. "I don't think there's much left to say." He was quiet. "I stayed silent for 30 years because I thought silence was how you kept a family together." I kept my voice even, not cold, not angry, just clear. "I was wrong. You can't build a family on humiliation. I should have known that sooner. I know it now." He looked at the folded paper again. "What is that?" "Something my father wrote before our wedding." I picked up my bag. He was right about most things. Richard didn't answer. He stood in the kitchen doorway in the gray February morning and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Not anger, not calculation. Something older and quieter than either. I walked to the front door. I did not look back. Outside, the February air was cool and dry, the desert sage sharp in the early morning. My car was packed. Daniel was meeting me at the new apartment at 9. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt. It did 30 years hurt even when leaving them was right. But I had done my crying in pieces quietly over 18 months of early mornings and late nights in that kitchen. I had cried enough. I started the car and drove toward the morning. Daniel was already there when I arrived. He had borrowed a friend's truck and carried up the 3 boxes I'd shipped ahead. Books, kitchen things, the small items I had chosen carefully over 2 weeks. Not everything I owned, just what I actually wanted. There was a difference I had learned between what you accumulated and what you chose. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. Small, genuinely small, the kind of space that required intention. 1 bedroom, a living area with good light, a kitchen the size of a generous closet, and a window facing east toward a row of old Palo Verde trees that filtered the afternoon sun into something soft. I had chosen it specifically for that window. Daniel set the last box down and looked around. "It's smaller than I expected." "I know," I said. "That's why I wanted it." He looked at me, understood the way he usually understood things without needing them explained. "Okay," he said. "Good." We carried boxes for an hour. He offered to stay and help unpack. I told him I wanted to do it slowly on my own time. He nodded and hugged me at the door tight, certain the way he'd been hugging me since December. "Call me tonight," he said. "I will." After he left, the apartment was completely quiet. I stood in the center of the empty room, cardboard boxes against one wall, a folding chair Daniel had left by the window, the afternoon light coming through the Palo Verde branches making slow shadow patterns on the bare floor. I crossed to the window and opened it. Desert sage, a trace of citrus. The particular smell of an Arizona afternoon that was neither summer nor winter, but something quietly its own. I stood there and breathed it in, and felt the smallness of the room, not as a lack but as a choice, deliberate, considered entirely mine. I went to the first box. Found what I was looking for immediately because I had packed it on top on purpose. My father's notebook. I carried it to the folding chair and sat down. Opened it past my own entries, past entry 1 from August, past 43 pages of timestamps and dollar amounts and names, all the way to the very last page. Blank, white, completely empty. I had filled this notebook with evidence, the careful record of everything done to me and everything I had done in response. That record was finished now, complete. This page was different. This page was after. I reached into my bag for a pen, held it over the blank page. Outside, the Palo Verde trees moved in the afternoon breeze. The light shifted on the floor. For 30 years, I had been someone's wife, someone's silence, someone's signature waiting to happen. I was something else now, still figuring out exactly what, and for the first time in a very long time, that felt like possibility rather than danger. I put the pen to the page. The pen felt different in my hand than it had in August. In August, I had written with urgency, the tight, precise urgency of someone beginning to count, someone who had just understood that every detail mattered and that no one else was going to keep the record for her. Now I sat in the quiet of the new apartment, the afternoon light moving slowly across the floor, and I held the pen over the last blank page of my father's notebook and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Unhurried. I thought about what I wanted to say. Not the evidence kind of saying, not timestamps and dollar amounts and names. Something else. The kind of thing you say to someone you love when the difficult part is finally over and you want them to know it ended well. I wrote slowly, 3 lines. Dad, I used the notebook. I didn't sign when I was being pressured. Your daughter is treated with respect. I set the pen down. Read the 3 lines back. They were plain, no legal language, no careful documentation. Just the simplest possible account of what had happened and how it had ended. My father had been a plain man. He had kept plain ledgers. He had written his most important instructions in 2 plain sentences on the inside cover of a brown leather notebook that sat in a kitchen drawer for 31 years waiting to be needed. Plain was right. I closed the notebook, held it in both hands for a moment. The worn leather cover, the soft corners, the slight warping of the back pages from years of a kitchen drawer. The most important thing my father had ever given me, and I had carried it in my bag for 18 months without fully understanding what I was carrying. I understood now. I got up from the folding chair and carried the notebook to the windowsill. Set it there upright, spine facing the room the way my father kept his favorite books on the shelf above his desk at the store. Not put away. Present. Then I stood at the open window and looked out at the Palo Verde trees. The afternoon was warm and still. A pair of birds moved through the upper branches. Below on the street, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary neighborhood going about its ordinary life. A car door, someone's music briefly, the distant bark of a dog. Ordinary, quiet mine. I had spent 30 years in a house that was large and well-furnished and full of the evidence of a life that looked from the outside completely fine. This apartment had bare floors and cardboard boxes and a folding chair by a window. It was the first place in 30 years that felt entirely like mine. I stayed at the window until the light changed. Some things don't end loudly. They don't need to. They just need the right moment, the right document, and one woman who finally decided that silence had cost her enough. I had decided, and it had been enough. I spent 30 years learning something I should have known far sooner. That silence is not love. That endurance is not virtue when it is used to cover up control and deception. There is a sentence I once read and have never been able to forget. The truth will set you free. I believe that with everything I have. It was the truth documented, proven, placed on the right table at the right moment that gave back everything they thought they had taken from me forever. If you are in a relationship where you constantly apologize for things that are not your fault, please do not wait 30 years like I did. Do not wait until everything becomes too much before you start paying attention. Pay attention now. Ask questions. Read carefully everything you sign. Know exactly what ground you are standing on. My personal belief is simple. Someone who truly loves you will never use your dependence as a weapon. No one has the right to make you feel unworthy of asking questions inside your own home. If this story touched you in any way, leave a comment below. Share it with someone you feel needs to hear this today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your moment to stay. Because there are many more stories waiting to be told. Thank you for being here from the very beginning to the very end. That means more than you know. A small note before we meet again. The stories ahead are built with intention, part grounded in truth, part woven with fictional elements designed to carry a deeper message. If that's not for you, that's perfectly okay. Choose what feels right for you. But if you stay, I promise, there will always be something worth pausing for.